Hi, sorry about that. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Yeah, my name is Patrick Eilers, and I'm a licensed professional counselor in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and that's where I'm calling in from today.
Okay, and can we go ahead and dig into your past leading up into your present?
Absolutely, yeah. So been a therapist for almost 10 years now, and I've been kind of leading up into my journey of becoming a therapist. I have a long history of working with different folks and populations, but what kind of got me into doing that is I felt I had experienced kind of some struggles when I was younger, certainly as an adolescent. I think certainly socially, and I ended up being diagnosed with what is now called ASD, autism spectrum disorder, at 11 years old.
Really?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
diagnosis, I mean, that was kind of a late, for those who you guys who know ASD, it's usually diagnosed a lot earlier. For me, it was diagnosed fairly late. And so I kind of had kind of a rough experience sort of going into high school and just kind of, socially connecting with people and those kind of things. And once I started to understand more about, how I operate with it and what it looks like for me, it gave me kind of a desire to learn a little more about people and what makes them function and those kind of things. But I felt really like I was kind of called to be a therapist when I was about 18 years old. And the event that kind of spawned that for me, and I've talked about it in other podcasts, is there's this video of people who come out and they have this big giant card of it's kind of hard to describe. It's like a big poster, and on one side of the poster it has an identity that they used to believe in, and they walk across the stage and they flip the identity into something else, and usually it's opposite of whatever they believe in themselves. And that was really kind of the moment where I was like, I want to be part of something like that for folks. I want to be part of that journey and helping people discover who they really are. And so that kind of kicked off my journey of where I was going and what I was doing as a therapist. And so I knew kind of going in, it was going to be a long journey. Ended up ultimately being 8 years, from 2007 to 2015, of me doing 4 years of bachelor work and then 3.5 years basically of master's work. I graduated from Spring Arbor University in 2012 with 2011 with a bachelor's in psychology, and then I followed it up. I started in 2012. I started in my master's program at Moody Theological Seminary in Michigan, and that is in Plymouth, Michigan. And it's an extension of the Moody campus in Chicago, for those who are familiar with that school. And so I got my degree in clinical counseling psychology in 2015, and then I started my journey as a therapist, and which has been a lot of ups and downs in a lot of different ways. I started out, I ended up kind of moving away from where I grew up in the state of Michigan, and was part of an organization in Saginaw, Michigan, which is up kind of in the thumb area, or in sort of, if you think about the mitt, sort of the crevice of the mitt, so to speak. And Saginaw was a unique experience for me. Kind of got thrown into the fire pretty early. Worked with a lot of different populations of people, a lot of different diagnoses, wide range of ages. Youngest client at that time was 5, oldest client was 62. So I had kind of everybody and everything in that experience, and I learned a lot of what I did like, what I didn't like, what I was comfortable with, how the field works, a lot of that kind of stuff early on. So I appreciate having that opportunity now, looking back at it, because I learned a lot. In 2018, I decided to switch my license. Originally, when you graduate from Moody, you have kind of a default setting license in Michigan, and the default setting license at the time was a psychologist license. And so, just to give you kind of a quick understanding of that, in Michigan, there's 3 different licensures, and all states have different licensures of therapy. So you have a psychologist, which are kind of in between. They're not psychiatrists; they can't prescribe medications, but they do a lot of psychological evaluations and stuff like that. And you kind of have counselors in the middle, and then you have social workers. And so we all kind of do some similar things, but we all have different sort of specialties in that way. So in 2018, I decided to switch my license and become an LPC, which is a professional counselor from a psychologist. When I did that, I had to go back to school for 100 hours. So I moved back downstate, and I did 100 more hours at Moody, and then I ended up, was able to switch my license after that. And then in 2019, during the 2018-2019 period, I was an adjunct professor at Concordia University here in Ann Arbor, and as well at the Jackson College facility for Michigan correctional facility. So I was actually working in the jail as an adjunct professor teaching intro to psychology. So that was pretty cool. So I got an opportunity to do that.
I have to ask, how did you like work? Did you change anybody's perspective while in jail?
I hope so. I mean, I only taught there one semester, but it was an interesting experience, and I felt like that was an opportunity when I was there. I more enjoyed working with those folks than I did with a lot of some of the students, because they had a much more of an engaging. They wanted to engage more. They wanted to have more conversation and some of those kind of things. So I did enjoy my time doing that. That was a great learning experience. So once I did that, then I decided I kind of wanted to go back into the field. So because once I acquired my license, I was able to do that. And I got a job at a startup practice in Lapeer, Michigan, which is kind of on the north side of Detroit, east of Flint area. So the startup practice really was an extension of a practice that was already existing, but they wanted to move into a different city. And it was really cool to kind of be part of that, just because again, starting a practice from scratch is really hard to do. And so we had some, we had a pretty good success. We worked for about a year, and we just kind of started getting some momentum, and COVID happened. And when that happened, it kind of wrecked a lot of what was going on. There were some things that happened with that business that split apart, and I kind of was left trying to search to find another place to be. And so in September of 2020, I ended up going to a place in Novi, which is a suburb of Detroit, to work with a recovery program for sex addiction. So what that looks like is basically people who are struggling with unhealthy sexual behavior coming in, specifically usually pornography or multiple relationships, infidelity, those kind of things. And so they were coming in.
Is there healthy pornography from like severe pornography? Like, do you put it on a scale like that?
Well, I think the big thing is, as far as pornography goes, is, how much of it is affecting your life. Number one, if you're in a relationship, is your partner comfortable with that or not? Most cases, partners are not. At least the ones we saw. I think certainly, if it ends up becoming something that, it's uncontrollable, I guess I kind of use that phrase. Like, is it something that you go and you have a hard time breaking from? Those are all probably things you want to look for. Certainly the more, and the thing is we're kind of in a sexual environment, so that doesn't make it easier, because a lot of stuff on social media and stuff are maybe not meant to be sexual, but they are sexualized. And so that adds to a lot of the reason why people have a hard time kind of breaking from that thought process. I always think about kind of healthy sex is usually relationship driving. So it puts you into relationship with someone or with your partner, whereas unhealthy sex usually drives you out of that and more into yourself. The more fantasy and the more control you have it for your own place, and you feel safer there, that's usually more likely unhealthy, because it's not drawing you into the relationship. It's not drawing you closer to somebody. So that's one way I've kind of thought about it, working there in the 4 years I worked there. So that was one of the things for me personally, I kind of thought about that as kind of a way to consider it.
Very good theory. I wanted to go back and say, which types of populations have you counseled? You said you counsel all types of populations. Name a specific population or a couple of them, and how they actually changed your perspective in counseling.
Well, I think the common ones are depression, anxiety. Certainly with couples, I've worked with those at different periods. Sometimes more than other times. I've done some of that. Working with kids, you kind of have a mix of things there. Typically, they're not as diagnosable with kids, because you talk about kind of environment stuff and some things like that, parenting that's going on, maybe a divorce or something like that. I've worked with bipolar. I've worked with schizophrenia. I've worked with some of those types of more maybe I guess kind of more severe type of mental illness in that sense. Not as commonly, but certainly there are people you do encounter in outpatient in that way. But I would say probably the biggest thing that changed my perspective was really how when I worked within the addiction population, because we were working in a program, I do think that my ability to become a better guide, so to speak, I think really improved, because when I was younger, I was kind of brought up in my training was really in the idea of like reflective therapy, meaning that, you spend a lot of time letting the person really process and understand who they are. Whereas in addiction recovery, you're spending a lot of time, you spend some time doing that, but you spend a lot of time giving them tools and giving them a real sense of direction, because it helps to anchor their life, so to speak. So I think I've really had a good balance over the last 9 years of becoming a person who can bring now both sides of those things. It really enhanced my ability to be able to be a better therapist on that side of it, the practical part of it, the stuff that I wasn't able to do as well, probably because I was intimidated to do it. Really, not because I didn't know it. I just didn't feel as confident in doing it as I am now. So I think that was probably my biggest growth over that period of time.
Do you think the behavior is the key to the whole psychology, regime? Like, what I mean by that is, do you believe that behavior plays a key role in the reason why we manifest these attitudes or happiness or sadness, and an environmental role play a part in how we digest our situation and our behavior, like making sure we can change our behavior and our thinking, because I'm just scared, because behavior could play like a very hard and tough role in what outcome we can have. Is that true?
Yeah, one of the ways I've kind of understood mental wellness, and this goes beyond diagnosis. This is just as human beings. Mental wellness to me is like a pie. There's all these different aspects in the pie that affect us, right? Our environment, our financial situation, our relational situation, whatever those are going on, that pie that exists there. And I think ideally we want to get to a point where all those pieces of the pie are equal. I think that's the goal, right? And that doesn't mean it's real, but that's obviously the ideal space we like to be in. But I think anytime those pieces of the pie are taken out or moved around, it kind of messes up the whole pie. It affects everything. So you're thinking kind of about attitude, or perspective, I think really comes from a place of, do you believe you have hope in something changing, for example? Do you believe you have the ability to see something else that hasn't yet been seen? A lot of that is really, that's kind of the definition of hope, is you haven't seen these things yet, but you believe that they're going to happen, and you continue to work toward that. I do think behavior tends to cement a lot of the things that we do believe about ourselves or about the world. The more we do something over and over again, the more likely we're going to believe it, whether it be positive or negative. And you kind of see this without people who make those types of, like I'll use example, weight loss is one of them. The more you eat healthier, the more your body desires to eat healthier. The more you eat unhealthy, the more unhealthy your body desires to eat. So the way I look at that is that, again, behavior plays a role in that. Certainly, like, what are you consistently doing? But does it affect the rest of your pie? If you eat unhealthy and you're in an unhealthy space, you're not going to want to go out and exercise. You're not going to want to go out and socialize. You're not going to want to do some of these other things that are healthy for us across the board. So I think what ends up happening is, it is, from a cognitive perspective, what we think about is probably going to affect what we're going to do, but it's also about how we see those things. If we understand that behavior does play a role in some of those way we solidify some of those thoughts, I do think that is true. So it's really about trying, I think, to bring that pie and try to find as much balance to that as we can. Obviously, we're not going to do it perfectly, but can we get to a point where we are allowing that pie to be able to be a motivator for us to continue to improve? Or are we just going to kind of throw up our hands and say, well, whatever happens kind of thing? What I've seen with addiction is that's typically what happens. Somebody comes to the point where they feel like they're never going to get better, and they just let that sort of guilt and shame, become permanent in some ways, and they kind of give up trying.
How do we actually change the negative thinking as people that suffer from mental health? Because I'm gonna be honest, I suffer from mental health, and I know of ways, but I want to know your input, because you're giving such great advice. So what are ways to change your negative behavior?
Well, from a therapeutic perspective, I mean, there is definitely the challenging thought idea. It's understanding, identifying what those thoughts are, those negative thoughts, and being able to find some way to challenge what those are, and understanding that that's what's in our head is not what necessarily is reality. I'd also say that goes for positive things too. Sometimes we're overly, anticipatory of something, or we expect something to work out a certain way, when really that's, there's things about that may not be realistic. So we have to kind of find that balance between there. But from a practical perspective, I mean, I certainly think challenging that is one of those things. Understanding, and when those thoughts come up that are negative, what else affects those thoughts? What else brings those thoughts up? Is it something I'm eating? Is it the lack of sleep I'm getting? Is it doing some of those other things? Maybe it's because I am feeling like I'm in a hopeless space in my life, in that very moment. I do think that we're always constantly identifying our emotions, and the more we know about what we feel, the more we can communicate that, even with ourselves. So I always tell people, like, those emotions wheels that you can find online. The Calm app has a really great one where you can identify what you're really feeling, understand it, meaning at least being able to sit with it, give it some space to, feel about it and understand what that is. And then being able to understand, okay, where is this really coming from? What's the origin of this feeling or this thought? Now that's easier said than done. Sometimes it takes practice. Certainly sitting with those, I think the more we slow down, that helps. Do we have quiet time? Do we have time to, reflect on things? Are we giving ourselves that space? One of the things I think that's a negative thing about social media and about this digital world is that we can have the phone in our hand at any time, anywhere. And so do we have a respectful distance with the phone? Do we break from that to go outside and enjoy, the connection of non-digital? Do we understand and put our phone away in the bedroom? Do we put our phone away in the bathroom so that's not always with us all the time? The more we have access to it, the more we're going to reach for that anytime we feel, down, sad, negative, whatever we might feel, lonely, whatever those feelings that are coming up, we want to get away from, we're going to jump for that. And typically what ends up happening with that is that people then just reinforce that. And again, that's where the behavior becomes more concrete, because I'm not allowing myself to actually, sit with some of those things that are making me uncomfortable. I'm just trying to escape it. And that's really where control and escape come into, I think, play with a lot of these behaviors.
Okay, and what kind of ups and downs have you had with therapy? Because you said you've had some ups and downs.
Well, the therapy field in general, I think, is one that can be very volatile for people, especially if you don't find a population that you love working with, early in your career. I know for me, I never really had one. I still don't think I have one. The things I've always saw as being, one of the advices I had very early people gave me were, if you see an issue or you see somebody that needs help on something, go for it and go try to find a way to solve that problem. And although that's a really great, on the surface, that's a great idea, and I don't disagree with that. On the other side of it, it's not really practical sometimes. There's not ways that people can pay for certain things. There's not ways that people have resources to get to certain things. Obviously, with the internet, it's a little bit different. But I think for me, one of the ups and downs I've had is just being able to establish a place where I feel like, hey, I'm going to be comfortable and I can continue to move forward. During the period of working with, where I was specializing with sex addiction, that was probably the most time that I've ever been able to have stability. But even then, there was still a lack of stability to some degree. So as a therapist, I do think there is, a lot of times outside the field, you hear a lot of, the media tends to sort of hype up the idea there's a lack of mental health resources, which to some degree is true and so to some degree isn't true. I think for me personally, the way I've seen it is that, it's the matter of, being able to find a group of people that are going to be consistent. They're going to keep coming in. And that's always the challenge, I think, with mental health is that, we talk a lot about mental health, but when the rubber meets the road, people have to be, in the therapist, they have to be in front of you, sort of thing, in order to work with you, whether it be virtually or physically. But that's one of the challenges I've run into, I think, is just that there's been a lot of inconsistency for me. And that might just be unique to me, but certainly it's not because I don't think I've been able to build a rapport with people. It's mostly been the fact that I've also moved around a lot, and I've had tendencies to, not be able to kind of sort of just plant into one place and just kind of go forward. And so that was kind of what I was hoping to do with my new business, but some of that's also changing. So again, there's always a roller coaster with the way things are, and you got to be open to kind of being able to modify what might happen. So there's always adaptability is a good skill to have.
So it's safe to say you've been around different personalities, obviously, no pun intended.
Well, even just people I've worked with too, different personalities, possibly people I've worked for, certainly there's a lot of variety of folks that are owners and things like that too. So I've had a lot of those experiences.
How have you internalized other people with mental health for your own mental health? Because, a counselor have to take care of his own mental health,
Yep. Yeah, I think for me, and I've had a lot of people always ask, do you? There's like a sort of a belief that we're always on all the time, right? And we're always analyzing, and we're always trying to figure out what's making people tick, and that's just not me. I think I've always tried to be a person who, when you close the door, you're a therapist, and when you're open outside the door, you're not. And so, when you're interacting with a client to a degree, that's the time you're a therapist, unless there's like a crisis situation. Typically you try to kind of be outside that space and try to get yourself back into the mentality of this is just somebody else that I'm interacting with. For me, trying to find good hobbies has been important. Trying to find balance, like I talked about before, has been really important. I think there's it can be a very thin line between becoming, balanced and becoming overwhelmed. I know for me personally, 25 sessions to 30 sessions a week is pretty much about as much as I know I can take. Though I know I've had coworkers who can do 60 sessions a week. So, it just depends on what people can find there. So it's a matter of trying to be, self-aware of that. I think also just understanding, am I in this position to take any more people if I can, if I can't, being able to say no is a big part of that. Being able to say no is a great boundary to have. It's not, I know a lot of people think it's mean or may think it's, something it's, rejecting somebody, but saying no really is about a boundary yourself first, and then really being able to respect their boundaries of not promising something that you can't deliver on. And so for me, that's a big part of, what I want to do moving forward is just being able to know that I can find the balance. If it means I work more at different periods, then great. I know for me too, I never wanted to work weekends, so I have to work late at night then because that's when people are available if you're not going to work weekends. So there's always that's an example like a trade-off of that, because as a therapist, you have to do those things. You have to be adaptive to what clients are going to be available to do, and what you can do to help them. If you may not be comfortable initially, are you willing to step into that space and give yourself the benefit of your training? So I think those are come up.
I'm sorry. Do you think you reached self-actualization?
I don't think I'm ever going to reach self-actualization. That's my goal. So I like to think that I'm trying to go that way, but I feel like there's always things you need to improve. And I know for me, there's, a lot of personal stuff I still probably wrestle with in my own mind. It just may not come out here, or may not come out, as a clinician. But yeah, I think I can never be fully self-actualized. I have ways to go before I'm there.
Well said, by the way. So where are you going in the future?
Well, right now I'm in a bit of what I guess I would call a long-term transition of, at the end of last year, I decided that I really wanted to venture out on my own. And part of that venturing was to become a coach. And I've got my professional coaching certification, and decided to become, a clinical supervisor training. And the main goal of that was that, to me, I feel like the mental health world is changing, and it's always changing, but it's been changing more lately. And there's been a variety of different types of approaches to trying to, meet this mental health need. And coaching, I think, is one of them that, opens the door for some people. And so I was trying to get ahead of that curve a little bit. But unfortunately, I left where I was when I was working with sex addiction. If you leave a specialty, you're not going to necessarily have a lot of people that are going to come with you because they're working in a program. So you're not going to be not going to be leaving and bringing, let's say 20 people with it. You're going to be leaving and starting from zero, and that's kind of what happened to me, and just unable to make up that difference. And so I've been trying to figure out if I need to go back and just kind of be a general therapist again for a while and kind of find that balance. And as time goes, if people are interested in working with me as a coach, that's great. The area where I'm most convicted as a coach right now is business owners who own their own practices in mental health. Like I was kind of saying earlier, a lot of practices are owned by clinicians, and so what they're kind of called dual role. When you're in a dual role environment, we've seen this in other areas. I think about sports, particularly car racing. There's, in the 90s, there were a lot of these guys that were in NASCAR that used to own their own team and also be race car drivers, and they never were successful doing both of those things. It's very hard to do that. It's hard to get out of both of those, being one mentality versus the other. And that's very similar to what happens with clinicians. Is they are clinicians first and they're owners second. And when that ends up happening, it ends up putting them in a position where their business suffers. And then that creates this culture of their business where everything becomes bottlenecked at the top. And there is no balance for those people who are owners because they're having to answer to everything. They want to have control over stuff that they don't need to have control over. And so as a coach, I want to come alongside and really help people of understanding, okay, this is how you can be a great clinician, but you can also be a great owner over here. And if you're a great owner, your clinic will thrive, because there is a need for clinicians to have, basically a very solid, stable home to be in. A lot of us are out there sort of doing our own thing or working for a variety of different places. I think it'd be nice to have a place where you feel like you could come and you could be able to work with people you enjoy working with, and also with your population you like working with. And so you, as clinic owners need to take that more seriously. And so my goal as a coach is to really come alongside, help them do that. I've seen a lot of stuff that doesn't work. I've also seen some stuff I've developed that I hope does work. So it's kind of one of those things where it's a lot of theory, but again, what I said earlier, one of the ups and downs is getting people to see why that's important. And so I'm not a salesman, but I can tell you that trying to sell that to a clinician versus trying to sell that to somebody who's outside the field are vastly different things. Everybody outside the field can say, well, that's a great idea. I really like that. I think it works as a business coach, and you see it in other businesses. But in mental health specifically, it's very hard to sell that, because a lot of owners who also own their own practice typically don't want to admit it's their practice that's suffering. So what ends up happening is trying to convince those people to work with me is a relatively big challenge. So one of the things I guess I'm in a position of, you're talking what's going to happen 10 years, is that I'm hopeful that will eventually take off. Maybe it's going to take that long for it to take off, but I'm willing to put the work in for that, because I do think in the end it's going to be something that will be valuable. But then again, it may not be. So I also have to be open-minded to the idea that, I'm kind of barking up the wrong tree kind of thing, if it turns out that that's not an area that's actually going to be sustainable. And I've run into this several other times in my career in other areas of, who's going to pay for what resources are available? Are people going to, is this something that people are actually going to want to participate in? And so that's where I kind of meant earlier by some of the ups and downs. This has been one of those times in my career where it feels a lot more down than up, but I know that it's perseverance and continuing to be adaptive and, find what works for this season. And then maybe down the road, the season will change. In fact, I know it will change. Just hopefully changes for the more better and the positive light of it. But, we'll see how that goes. I don't know how that'll unfold.
I have to ask this last question. What new mental health advancements are on the curve of being born and produced?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones, and I was just on a panel a couple of days ago. We were talking about AI and how does AI play into therapy, and
That was my next question.
yeah, and so AI right now. There's a big push for AI therapists, and one of the downsides is AI is very, it likes to be pleasing to whatever you put it in. Whatever your input is, it wants to give you. I mean, I took a Google course on AI a few months ago, and actually last year sometime, and basically one of their recommendations was, you never input information and just leave it. You input information, you edit it, you put it, you change it, you make it what it's supposed to be, because AI is not going to get it perfect. But I think a lot of people feel like you can type out an answer or a prompt and you're going to get the exact response. And I think if you start looking at that in a mental health space, that's just not going to be what's going to be beneficial for people to heal or people to understand how to improve themselves. Now, from a diagnosing perspective, or maybe from an assessment perspective, there could be some things that AI eventually will be able to do. But when you're talking about treatment, I think that's where it gets to the point where there's going to be things that AI will never be able to do, that, and even if it could do, would not necessarily be a benefit for people. I mean, I think you need to be able to speak to a human being or understand the nuances of being a human being that we're kind of missing as we've been becoming more digital. First it kind of started with obviously just communicating through text messaging for the most part, and that stopped people from calling. Now it's to the degree of us having these screens that are basically these barriers between us. Now, granted, you're seeing me in live time as talking, and that's a wonderful technology, but at the same time, you're also not getting a chance to see me as a person live. My speaking live is going to be way different than my speaking here in my office at home, talking to you on a screen. So I can sound a whole lot more confident on this space rather than being in front of a crowd of 10,000 people. So it's one of those kind of things where it's a great technology, but I worry that AI is one of those things where there's going to have to be some limitations. It'll be it'll have to have some limitations, because if it doesn't, I think it's going to lead people down a worse path than it would to a better path.
What about the scenario that AI, could use possible lasers or some type of laser therapy, to extract negative thoughts from your mind? you know, the negative thoughts that we have. That's a good invention, right? But that would require good AI, you know.
Well, I think there's, there probably some room for that to be good, something that could be positive. But then I'd say on the other side of that, our negative thoughts part of us understanding ourselves as humans. Like, do we need to have that sort of both the coin in order for us to be able to be the best versions of ourselves? I think we do. I mean, if you get to a point where everything that was negative is removed from your body and from your experience, what does that leave you with? I mean, it leaves you the space of not really learning from things that actually have been really painful that you've learned from and grown from. So,
Touche.
I'd be hesitant to say that, does it help extreme cases? Maybe that would be something that would be some benefit to it. But if we completely eliminate the things that are difficult, we're bound to be much more neutral, I would think, than necessarily be better. And I don't know if that necessarily helps us be the best versions of who we are.
Well said. And how can the people reach you, Patrick?
So best way to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn. So my name on there, Patrick Eilers, Eilers, Masters LPC. So you can find me on LinkedIn. We do have a Patreon channel for the company. It's called patreon.com/Bloomworks, BLOOM works. It's all one word. All the podcasts I do, several resources, stuff like that, all up on there. You can join for free. So definitely check that out. You can also email me at bloomworks, one word again, cc at gmx.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me through the company.
Thank you. Stay on the line. Thank you guys for joining my show today. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys another time. Bye.
Never waste my time. You are I want.